The world often sees India as a rising global power, a beacon of democracy, and a land of incredible diversity.
Leading this charge is Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a figure who commands immense popularity and respect.
He promised a new era of maximum governance, minimum government, vowing to root out corruption and usher in an age of progress.
But beneath the surface of soaring economic growth and grand pronouncements, a complex and troubling picture is emerging.
Whispers of authoritarianism, suppression of dissent, and the erosion of democratic principles are growing louder, leaving many asking, what is truly happening in India under Modi's leadership?
One of the most concerning allegations is the crackdown on freedom of speech in the press.
While Modi himself has spoken about constructive criticism and even celebrated reaching 100 million followers on X, formerly Twitter, reports suggest a very different reality.
How are critical news outlets and dissenting voices being silenced?
Are satirical videos that poke fun at the government being banned?
If so, what specific mechanisms are being used to enforce these bans, and who is giving the orders?
The claim that criticism is suppressed is a serious one.
Is there a systematic effort to control the narrative, and if so, what are the long-term consequences for a healthy democracy?
How is this information control contradicting his promises of transparent governance?
The issue of corruption also casts a long shadow.
Modi came to power promising to eliminate corruption, yet reports indicate that large-scale corruption scandals continue to plague the nation.
What is the structure of hypocrisy where promises of eradicating corruption are made, but the reality on the ground seems to be different?
How can a government that campaigned on an anti-corruption platform be so consistently associated with major corruption cases?
Is there a culture of corruption that has taken root, and if so, how is it being perpetuated despite the government's stated intentions?
Perhaps the most sensitive and alarming accusations revolve around the treatment of minority groups.
There are strong claims that under Modi's administration, particularly in regions like Manipur, human rights violations are occurring, and religious minorities, especially Muslims and Christians, are facing discrimination and violence.
The U.S. State Department's human rights reports have raised significant concerns about the suppression of minorities.
What are the full details of the human rights abuses in places like Manipur?
How has the response from the state government, which is supported by the ruling party, inflamed tensions, leading to tragic outcomes like the deaths of over 200 people and the destruction of churches?
Is the political ideology rooted in Hindu supremacy, which some critics link to Modi's past involvement with certain organizations, contributing to this increased discrimination?
Prime Minister Modi's strong stance on various issues is often lauded by his supporters.
However, critics point to a stark disconnect between his powerful leadership and the reality faced by minority communities, who feel threatened and marginalized.
How does this exacerbation of discrimination align with India's democratic ideals of equality for all its citizens?
When Modi reacted angrily to a journalist at the White House for questioning him about religious discrimination, stating it was contrary to the facts, how did international human rights organizations immediately refute his claims?
What is the deeper truth behind these accusations of torture, discrimination, and repression?
The economic policies championed by Modi's government are also under scrutiny.
While headlines often tout high growth rates, there are reports of a rising unemployment rate and soaring prices for essential goods, making life increasingly difficult for the poor.
What is the collapsed truth behind these economic policies?
How can a nation be experiencing economic growth on one hand, while large segments of its population are struggling with poverty and joblessness on the other?
Is the promise of prosperity being realized for everyone, or is there a widening gap between the rich and the poor, as suggested by the fact that the ruling party lost seats in general elections due to dissatisfaction with economic policies and growing inequality?
Furthermore, there are allegations that Modi's government has undermined the very fabric of Indian democracy.
Some critics argue that his leadership style, while popular, has led to the suppression of critical thinking.
What is the collapse of academic freedom when scholars who express dissenting views are attacked, threatened, and even subjected to violence by those associated with Hindu supremacy?
What specific political tactics are being employed that are seen as conflicting with democratic principles, especially when Modi himself appears to tacitly approve of them?
The divisionary policies aimed at consolidating Modi's popularity are said to be damaging India's reputation on the world stage, particularly as a leader of the global south.
How has the promotion of Hindu nationalism, while strengthening Modi's base, damaged India's long-standing spirit of religious coexistence?
Are powerful figures within the political landscape acknowledging that this environment is becoming increasingly difficult for minorities?
What is the endgame of this assertive Hindu nationalist stance, and how is it impacting India's image as a diverse and inclusive nation?
The alleged use of discriminatory rhetoric by Modi's ruling party during general elections, such as referring to Muslims as infiltrators, is deeply troubling.
How does repeatedly dividing voters along religious lines contribute to a healthy democracy?
What is the darkness of these divisive statements, and what are the confessions of fear from non-Hindu communities who feel targeted?
In essence, the recurring themes are the alleged contradictions between Modi's promises and the reality on the ground, the suppression of dissent and free speech, the persistence of corruption, and the alarming accusations of human rights abuses against minority communities.
The question that looms large is whether the maximum governance, minimum government slogan has inadvertently paved the way for a more authoritarian style of rule.
As India navigates its path on the global stage, these unresolved mysteries and persistent questions about its democratic health and commitment to human rights will continue to demand answers.
The dual reality of economic progress alongside unchecked human rights abuses is a profound paradox that the world is watching with increasing concern.
How will India reconcile these conflicting narratives?
The true impact of Modi's strong-arm political methods and his vision for India remains a subject of intense debate and a critical area for future scrutiny.